If you've ever tried to work with time zones or really struggled to work with time zones, then I'm not surprised. These are or can be very difficult things to work with. And of course, they can cause a lot of problems if you don't get this right. So what we're going to look at is how we can set time zones and just talk a little bit about them in terms of DateTime. Now we know that when we create a new DateTime instance, by default, we have a time zone in here, we have a time zone type, and we have the time zone. Now by default, this is UTC. Now my advice would be, if you are building an application, don't necessarily, unless it's very critical, allow your users to choose their own time zones. There's usually not much point in doing this. If you're all on one time zone, regardless of where you are in the world, generally this just works fine. If you are using, say, post times like 2 days ago, this can just work really well. But if you do want to change the time zone, maybe just keep one time zone or whatever, then we'll go ahead and show you how to do this now. So let's start by just setting the time zone specifically on a new DateTime instance. So this is just for one instance. This won't globally change the time zone, but it will do for one instance. So to do this, we use the set time zone method on any DateTime instance we have. Now into this, you would think that we would just be able to pass a time zone. That isn't the case. We need to use a new class called DateTimeZone. We create a new instance of this, passing in the time zone that we want to use. So in this case, we would say new DateTimeZone, and into this we pass the full time zone. Now you can find these in the PHP manual, but for now I'm just going to say Europe, London, like so. So now that we've done this and we go ahead and do a var dump on date, this time zone will now be different. So go ahead and refresh, and there we go. We have Europe, London set just on there. Now, of course, this can be a little bit tricky if you are working with multiple instances and you need to switch around the time zone. This can be really annoying. So we can actually shorten this line down. If we just go ahead and comment this out, grab this, and we'll do this down here so we can see the difference. We can actually immediately pass this in. Now what we can do is, for the first argument, we can go ahead and just say now. This will just give us the current date and time, as we've already seen. And then what we can do is say new date time zone, going and just passing in the time zone that we need to use. And that is as simple as it gets. We get exactly the same result. So here, this is really useful because if you did want to pass a specific date in here, as we've already seen, either by a normally structured date or some more human readable version, then this will work really well for you. Now, if you do need to find a list of time zones, as I've already mentioned, you can find them on the manual, or what we can do is we can use date time zone, which we've just passed into that, and we can say list identifiers like so. And we can go ahead and just do a var dump directly on this, and we'll see what we get. So let's go ahead and do that, and you can see that you get a long list of them all there. So if you wanted to, you could go ahead and use that static list identifiers method in some kind of form. If you wanted the user to choose their time zone from a list, now you have all of the time zones. You can go ahead and store that in the database for that particular user, and then apply that to any new DateTime instances you actually create. Now, there's one problem here, and that is that when we go ahead, if we just go back a little bit and set a time zone, surely we don't want to do this for every new DateTime instance we create. That would be really annoying. What you would have to do in this case is do something like user time zone, and you just really wouldn't want to do that for every new DateTime instance. So what you could do is set a default time zone for your entire application. So we're obviously working on one page here, but if you have some kind of bootstrap file that boots everything up for you, what you would want to do is you would want to use the date default time zone set function within PHP, and inside of here we just pass in an identifier. So let's say you did have a value up here that was stored maybe in your user, and you were grabbing that from the database. You would go ahead and grab a value back like Europe, London. You may have this in a database table or in a separate table and have a relationship. Either way, what you could then do is go ahead and pass this directly in. So obviously this only needs to be run once. You don't need to do it on every page, as long as you require in some kind of bootstrap file. If you're working with a framework, perfect. You can just put this in some kind of bootstrap file. So now when we go ahead and create a new DateTime instance, we obviously don't need to keep passing that DateTime in. We have a default time zone set for every new instance we create, and that is as simple as it gets. So there's not really much else that we need to do here. We know how to set time zones. We've previously looked at how we actually extract the time zone for a specific DateTime instance, which you won't usually need to do, but if you do, you already know how to do that from a few videos back. And there we go. Working with time zones, incredibly simple with DateTime.